A very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Dharmendra Kanani. I'm Chief Operating Officer, Chief Spokesperson at Friends of Europe. It gives me great pleasure, even though it's really quite controversial and adversarial in parts, that this conversation we're having, which is the hot topic of the day, both in Europe, globally, which is about what to do around frozen Russian assets. It's been a topic that Friends of Europe has been working on for over 2 years, in particular, directly with a global expert and a legal authority on the topic of sovereign debt. That's Lee Buchheit, who will be joining us in this virtual discussion. We have brought together a broad coalition to really address some of the questions, risks, and politics at the heart of what we do with frozen Russian assets. I apologize in advance. It's a manual. We tried hardest, but it's men. And they're just put that out there and get it out of the way. But these are people who, regardless of their gender, are legal experts and authorities on the topic that's before us. What we do know is that this conversation really is in two parts, or made up of two major issues. One is about politics, political temerity, and the ability to squarely look in the eye the potential future that we might face if we don't do something around Russian assets now. The second is a risk-based approach to governance. We know that Belgium's queasy about having the money used in the way that was being suggested by others. And we also heard today that, the European Central Bank has said that the European Commission's proposals are really out with its mandate. So everyone's having a go. Everyone's got a view. And I think but one of the things that we need to bear in mind is that since, Second World War, we have never been in a situation such as this. It is uncharted territory. And therefore, force majeure has to play a part in everything we do in relation to risk management, the legalities, etc. But enough of me. I want to first turn to the coalition. I call it the coalition of the willing that we brought together. Given the hot topic that it is, I don't believe one think tank or one organization can solve this by itself, neither it should, or any one government. So we've brought together Chatham House, Atlantic Council, legal authorities from the United States, and political commentators from the UK. And so to really put their minds to this knotty problem of what to do and how to do, we work with, should we unfreeze Russian assets for Ukraine's support. First, I want to turn to John. John, you're in the US. Thank you for joining us. And you're Atlantic Council, you've been ambassador. Tell us, what's the reading from the Hill? What's your view? Is there a sense that there's a flip-flop happening every day, as we've been accustomed to, or is there a focus on the idea of unfreezing frozen assets to support the war, the illegal war, or I don't know, so I would call it illegal invasion of Ukraine? Over to you, John.
Okay. If you're talking about Congress, there is overwhelming support in both parties, well beyond the two-thirds required to overcome a presidential veto for helping Ukraine defend itself against Moscow's aggression. And we've seen that on many occasions when there's been a vote. But it's also true that President Trump has substantial influence, maybe even overwhelming influence at the present time, over Republican actions in Congress. And as a result, some serious efforts, both Republican and Democrat, in a bipartisan way, to address the needs Ukraine has as it fights Russian aggression, have not moved. Most prominent, of course, is the bill put together by Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal regarding massive sanctions on Russia and those who are helping Russia fight this war of aggression. But on the frozen assets is not as well understood an issue in Congress, or for that matter, more broadly in the United States. But perhaps the person who knows the most about it, a Republican of some influence, French Hill, is an avid supporter of making sure those frozen assets find their way to Ukraine, both to provide financial support and ultimately, as part of financial support, enabling Ukraine to afford weapons to stop the Russian aggression. And Hill has been very active, including with Secretary of Treasury Bessent, who, in my understanding, which is not complete but not bad, is generally speaking favorably disposed towards using economic means, A, to quote unquote, using his own words, collapse the Russian economy, and B, to support Ukraine. But he is a loyal member of the Trump administration. And the overall administration's approach has been not to use overwhelming pressure on the Kremlin, which I think is a serious tactical error.
I'll come back to you on some of the points you just raised, and I'm sure people have questions for you. But it's clear there are some levers in the system, political levers in the system, if there was a way and a will and a mood, and a kind of a sense of a momentum that this is the right thing to do. On that point, I want to move to Lee. Lee, thank you very much for joining us. It's good to see you again, albeit online. 2 years ago, we organized a working group on this very matter. And you were very eloquent and very clear and an authority on the risks and the opportunities presented by using the frozen assets. For our audience, our listeners and viewers, could you, in very short terms, explain the idea and what you see as being the big political risk in not acting on the idea that you and others have been proposing? Lee, over to you.
Sure, thank you, and good to be with you. There have been three broad concerns about liberating the frozen assets. The first is legal. What is the basis under international law for doing this? International law is notoriously amorphous and notoriously elastic. But even so, it is not clear what the international basis would be. The second is a concern about the effect of confiscating, to use the word that many do, these assets on the willingness of other countries to keep their international monetary reserves in Europe. Would it frighten them? And the third is the concern about retaliation. Could Russia move against the remaining European assets in Russia? Belgium has its own set of concerns. The idea that Hugo and Dalip Singh and I have put forward try to focus on the first two of those concerns. And it goes like this. You start with, I think, the only indubitable legal conclusion under international law, which is that Ukraine has a claim against Russia for reparations. If you determine that the invasion was illegal, and every jurist I've spoken to west of Belarus has reached that conclusion, then it follows, as a matter of international law, that Russia is obliged to make reparations. Now, this claim of Ukraine against Russia, therefore, becomes an asset in the hands of Ukraine. And the question is how to use it creatively to effect a mechanism by which the assets can be seized as a matter of domestic municipal law in the European country, wherever they may be. The problem is one of legal geography. The claim against Russia resides with Ukraine. The claim Russia has to return of the assets runs from Russia to Euroclear. If one could bring those two claims into alignment so that the person holding the frozen assets is also the beneficiary of the claim against Russia, then you set up a situation in which a set-off, sometimes called a netting of accounts, can occur. That is an everyday feature in virtually every legal system. So what we've proposed is move the assets out of Euroclear and, for that matter, out of Belgium. They are tremendously nervous about their exposure, and that has justified them in asking for pretty lavish indemnities that the European Union is choking on. Move it out, move it to an EU creature, move it to a special purpose company. Use that money to lend to Ukraine, but Ukraine pledges as collateral security for that loan its claim against Russia. And it says that if ever Russia pays reparations, that money will flow through to repay the loan. Otherwise, the loan is non-recourse to Ukraine. So the one and only circumstance in which the loan gets repaid is if Russia pays reparations. But at the end of the day, if Russia were to demand its assets back, the person holding the assets would have an equal claim against Russia for the unpaid reparations. That would allow a set-off. In the simplest system, that entity, that custodian, would simply assign to Russia the Ukraine loan together with the pledge of reparations claim, in effect assigning back to Russia its own credit risk. Now, Russia will, of course, not wish to pay reparations, but in the end, that simply means it saves on reparations what it loses on the assets. So there is no circumstance in which Russia could come out of this in a negative position, as long as you anchor the assumption that Russia is obliged to pay reparations. Final comment. While that assumption is legally strong, it is politically fragile, because if Ukraine, as part of a settlement negotiation, were to be forced to waive its claim against Russia for reparations, this whole thing would evaporate. So, in my view, the time to do this is now. The 28 points were a chilling reminder that at least President Trump would be prepared to waive Ukraine's claims against Russia, whether for humanitarian violations or anything else. So it is a fragile thing. Use it or lose it.
Sure. Lee, I wanted to, I'm going to move on to Hugo and others before I open up to the wider audience. You talked about this canny wheeze of, Ukraine is the claimer, or it should be the person that actually receives the reparations. And you're saying drawing a line from Moscow, Ukraine to Europe. On whose authority? Who would have the authority to do that?
Well, if you accept the assumption that this is a claim Ukraine has against Russia, then it can assign that claim as collateral security. Conceivably, it could even sell it, but that would be quite unusual. But it could assign it, and that's all we need. We need to bring into alignment the person holding that claim against Russia as being the same person that Russia has a claim against for return of the assets. And then it nets off.
Sure. Okay. I think we'll come back to this point, because it's not clear to me, at least, that, in terms of legal personality, who would actually do the work to get this done? And as you said before, it's highly political and very politically fragile. Let's move to the issue about Belgium's queasiness. Hugo, you have been very open and very direct about the fact that you assess that the risks or the issues being raised by Belgium are surmountable. They're not insurmountable. I mean, they can be dealt with, and perhaps there's far too much unnecessary issue around the risk and the burden, let alone the politics. Hugo, over to you.
Thank you so much. One thing is, this is obviously a technical discussion, and I would encourage those who want to delve into it to look at our website, ukrainereparationsloan.com, and you will see a paper there which sets out in detail the legal basis for what we're talking about. The other thing I want to say is, just to reiterate what Lee said, is that there is a clear and present danger to Ukraine from the way that the Trump administration is behaving. Trump could pull the rug from under Ukraine at any moment. Just because we've survived the Thanksgiving deadline doesn't mean that we are out of the woods. This whole thing could be over by Christmas if we do not act. And what I mean by we is that Europe needs to come up with a viable alternative plan. Just talking about we've got a plan isn't enough. It's got to be viable. Europe produced a plan at Geneva, before Geneva, just over a week ago, and Rubio said he hadn't even read it. That shows how much attention the Americans pay to Europe. The way to get America to pay attention to Europe is to put a lot of money on the table. This is something where Europe has got strategic autonomy, at least for now. We have a card, a Trump card, which is the Russian assets. But if we're not careful, Donald Trump will reach over the table and he will grab that card from our grasp, and we will not be able to play it anymore. So we must move fast, and we must either move with the European Commission's version of a reparations loan, or with the variety of reparations loan that Lee, Dileep Singh, and I have been advocating. They are both reparations loans in the sense that Ukraine only has to repay the money if it gets war reparations from Moscow. But the difference between the two schemes is that under the European Commission's version, the European Union borrows cash from Euroclear and then itself makes a loan to Ukraine. Under our scheme, you take the entire Russian account away from Euroclear and you put it in a new vehicle in a different jurisdiction. Now, why is that important? That's important, first, because the Belgian Prime Minister has said, if anybody wants to take the entire Russian account away from us, he can have it. I want to get rid of it. So it's an idea that could help deal with the Belgian problem. Secondly, as Lee hinted, it can help deal with the Trump problem, because under the European Commission scheme, what happens is that if at any moment in time the EU is bullied into unfreezing those Russian assets, and it's already lent money to Ukraine, the EU has to come up with the cash itself. Under our scheme, what happens is that if Trump bullies the EU to unfreeze the assets, say as part of some sort of peace deal, all that Vladimir Putin gets is an IOU from Ukraine saying, I promise to pay you 185 billion euros or whatever it is, if you pay me reparations. And Vladimir Putin can take that and plaster it on the downstairs toilet in his dacha, but he can't use it to get cash to pay his soldiers or rebuild his army.
Okay, but Hugo, this is kind of the powerful, strong statements you are making. Ultimately, you're hinting, you're not hinting, you're actually being clear. There is a political issue, there's a timing issue. There's clearly a timing issue because Ukraine will witness, without speed of support, another very harsh winter and a loss of more lives. And what we need here is the solutions that will matter with some speed. So on the Belgium side, just say, is Belgium being unnecessarily risk averse?
I think that under the Commission's scheme, Belgium is absolutely entitled to ask for a guarantee. It's entitled to ask for a guarantee that if at any moment those assets are unfrozen, the EU has got to be able to repay them. One of the advantages of our scheme is that you don't need a liquidity guarantee for Belgium. Now, you mentioned in your introduction that the European Central Bank was not keen on the European Commission scheme. I'm not sure that that's an entirely accurate reading of the rather nuanced Financial Times story of this morning. However, what you can say is that clearly under the European Commission scheme, they have got to come up with a cast iron liquidity guarantee to satisfy Belgium. Under our scheme, you don't need that. But I do think that there's one thing which Belgium is completely wrong about, which is suggesting that we need to keep these assets in reserve for a peace plan.
Sure.
The only peace plan that is available now is the Witkoff-Kremlin capitulation plan. What we need to do is deploy these assets to help Ukraine stand up to Russia. It's what Donald Trump calls peace through strength. That is what we need in Ukraine, and that is why we need this Ukraine reparations loan to happen. And it's not just before the end of the winter. It has to happen in the next few days or weeks.
Indeed, that's my
because
point.
Otherwise, but it's not just because Ukraine's going to run out of cash. It's because if we don't act, Donald Trump is going to grab our cards.
Indeed. Thank you. Colleagues, I'm going to bring our final contributor into the debate. So can I just warn you to, signal, use your virtual hands, and make sure your camera is on, so that you can indicate to me that you want to come in and contribute. And if there are no hands up, those of you who know me and worked with me before, I will simply pick on you. I'd have a list of the people out there, and it would be a waste of time if we didn't have some of the rich authority that's in this virtual room to contribute to this very important conversation about what we do in terms of Europe's final decision-making process before, let's say, mid-December. Timothy, give us you're from Chatham House. You have been vocal on this topic. Give us your brief assessment of what colleagues have said on the approach to reparations loan, and what you think, if there are alternatives, or what we need to do to break some of the political deadlock, and what role can UK play in this, if at all, any? Over to you, Timothy.
No, sure. I mean, actually, I'm a financial market expert as well. I mean, I've been in the city for over 30 years. I work at a large asset manager. We manage about $500 billion of assets. It's interesting. One of the previous speakers mentioned, the concern in the market about seizure and immobilization assets, that it may impact on the reserve currency status of the euro. I can assure you that on immobilization, there was zero movement of reserve currencies out of G7 jurisdictions, right? And one of the reasons for that is you've got about $7 trillion of reserve currency assets globally, right? There aren't any alternative liquid markets for countries like Saudi Arabia and China to put those assets. It's simply not an option. They haven't done it. I know, interestingly, about 6 months ago, the French Treasury, I think, Saudi Arabia had suggested that if this happened, that the Saudis may move assets. Again, thinking of how that works in practice, right? So if Saudi actually did that, it would sell oats or buns or gilts or whatever. The prices of those assets would drop, the yields would rise, European growth would slow, the global economy would slow, commodity prices would collapse, Saudi Arabia would get hurt. And actually, it would be a globally systemic event, which would mean a flight to safe haven assets, which would be back to buns, gilts, and treasuries. So that was scaremongering. I know Euroclear have put some of that out as well. It's just complete rubbish. It's not the case. The biggest risk to the euro, I would say, as a reserve currency, is that if we don't support Ukraine, if Ukraine loses this war, the impacts of that will be devastating for Europe. Tens of millions of Ukrainians moving west. That will strain European politics, social and economics. It will mean a massive increase in defense spending from 2 to probably 5% of GDP. It would mean increased borrowing, higher rates, lower growth, a weaker euro, right? So,
but presumably also effect on markets and the value of stock.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, this is an existential threat to Europe. The plus factor, I think, in the last month or so has been that the scale of the challenge, the scale of the problem has been clear. I mean, the European Council provided the briefing paper in terms of the financing shortfall of Ukraine. We know the gap in its financing for 26 to 27 is 140 billion euros, right? That's combined budget support and military support. The IMF also suggested they're willing to provide a 4-year EFF for Ukraine to run to 2029, but they argue that the limited budget financing shortfall in their program is also $140 billion, near enough the same amount, right? So the IMF is clearly signaling that there is no program, there is no support from the fund for Ukraine unless this financing gap is met. Clearly, the Americans are not willing to provide it. The gap has to be met by Europe. If it's not the reparation loan or a variant of it, what is it? What is Europe going to do? Are they going to continue to tax their taxpayers for this? I don't think that's politically wise. I mean, I find the debate at the moment. I mean, I agree. I mean, I get the Belgian position about guarantees in a worst case scenario that either the sanctions are not rolled over every 6 months, immobilization ends, or they lose a legal case in sometime in the future against the Russians and they have to repay. I mean, the chances of that are pretty small, right? We can resolve the 6-month rollover by a EU decision about moving from unanimous to qualified majority voting. There's the individual countries can themselves, the double tap. Individual countries can get legislation to immobilize their assets in their jurisdictions. But in the end, look, I mean, the legal chances of Russia launching a legal case in Belgium or jurisdictions and winning that, this would be a 5 to 7, 8 year process. And they haven't launched legal action so far on immobilization. Now, this is not seizure. The reparation loan is not seizure. It's not moving much beyond immobilization. Would the Russians risk a legal action in Western jurisdictions? And the chance of them winning, I think, is fairly low. So actually, the risk to Belgium and European countries who want to step in and provide assurance for Belgium by joint sharing of the risk is pretty low. We should do it. But let's just think about this. The alternative of not doing it is we have to spend the money now. So our taxpayers, we have to write big checks. So I mean, it's a weird choice in my mind, right? I mean, the decisions that have been made is, either we have the outlay now, 140 billion euros in the next 2 years, or we go down the reparation loan story, and there's a small chance, I'd put it less than 10%, that in 5 to 7 years' time, that there's a possibility that we lose this legal case and we have to pay the money back. I take the reparation loan every time, right? Now, just one final thing, and then move on to other people. I mean, it's interesting, the ECB today was on the FT, as was mentioned by a previous speaker. So the ECB have suggested under the reparation loan idea, as per the European Commission, they're not willing to provide the liquidity backstop, right? They're worried that this would signal monetary financing, etc. It would, I mean, I think in their logic, it would suggest concern about undermining, debasing the euro because of more monetary emission. I find that pretty extraordinary when you think about it, that actually in the period since 2009, the ECB have conducted trillions of euros of QE, monetary emission, bond buying to support bankers like myself. And in the post of COVID, I mean, they saw, the global financial crisis, they saw the European debt crisis, and they saw COVID. It's such a systemic risk to Europe and the Eurozone that they felt that they had to go down the monetary emission route. I would argue that this is as existential to the European project. And actually, if you were willing to spend trillions of euros of monetary support on those crises, providing 140 billion liquidity support on a low probability event 5 to 7 years in advance, if there's a legal case lodged by Russia that it loses, it's ridiculous.
It is, Timothy.
So it suggests to me, and it's something, people like me have been doing this for 3.5 years, arguing for this. I mean, it's the classic European bureaucracy, including the ECB, finding reasons not to do it. That's the reality, right? And politicians, in the end, we need leadership in Europe. We need politicians to make decisions, change laws, do whatever it takes to force this issue through. Or Ukraine loses.
Thank you. No, I agree with you. But it seems to me there's an issue here of it's them and not us. Our families and our buildings are not being bombed or killed. And I think that the sense that it's not actually within the heart of Europe is being lost in the political mood, but also the emotional currency of the EU. And it's very clear that all the other issues that you refer to, people felt the existential threat within the system here within Europe. But unfortunately, they're not understanding what the stakes are, given the lessons we've learned in the past 8 years, but especially after what happened in 1945. And you're quite right. Quantitative easing was easily done in a period of time without any of this political, horse trading that's taking place. But thank you for the points you've made. I want to open this up to others who are in the room. Thank you for those of you who've raised your hands. I want to go to representative from Ukraine first. Irina, I can't see you directly, but I think you have your hand up. You wanted to come and contribute. Do introduce yourself and what I want to be clear. This isn't a Q&A panel discussion. This is about our collective brains working together to think about what can be done at speed that's politically capable and possible within a short period of time. So, Irina, over to you.
Yes, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much. My name is Irina Krasnoshtan. I'm from the Ukrainian think tank or civil society group, which is called International Center for Ukrainian Victory. We have worked quite closely with a number of people in this virtual room, and I wanted to just reflect and share some of the thoughts, because there are a few things that I wanted to pick up on. First of all, is about the cards in the hand. I think the European partners really underestimate how strong of a card they have in the hands, because right now Ukraine is being pushed and pulled from all the sides, because we are actually in quite a weak situation right now with all the bombing of energy infrastructure, front lines and internal things and so on. So Russians and Americans think they have a strong leverage on us, and if Ukraine had this card in our hands, Europeans would have been also on the table, because this is not a small amount of money, and also providing Ukraine with long-term sustainable support is given a signal that Ukraine will not be abandoned, and it doesn't need to be banned right now into anything just because Russia decided so. So I feel like this is really not fully understood. Then the other question, there was this comment about the Belgians being really happy to give this money back. I don't think so, because actually Belgians have got quite a lot of taxes out of this money, and they claim to have given a lot to Ukraine, which is true. Of course, a lot of money has been provided through this money to Ukraine, but quite some amounts have stayed in Belgian authority.
Sure.
And one other thing that we have worked with my colleagues in our organization, that we have analyzed some of the decisions, and we have noticed that actually European Union is able to take certain decisions in a creative way when it wants to. So, for example, with the private Russian assets, there were some decisions to give back money to compensate the European investors in Euroclear with Russian private assets. So you can be creative when you want to. And one other point.
Yes,
yeah.
I would like you to, if I may ask you, just concluding by saying, what would you like to see happen right now? What's your call to people here, but also to politicians?
Yeah. Well, our call is, we have been working quite a lot on persuading Belgium. There were manifestations all over the places in different countries. We're trying to persuade Belgium through different means, public, non-public. And I think that other, European member states needs to be more clear with Belgium about what is at stake. And also that if this money is given back to Russia, I'm sorry, but Russia will use it to bomb then not only Ukraine more in the future, but also send drones and all the other stuff into your countries. So I think that we need, I agree that we are running out of time. The decision needs to be there, and I think that other European capitals should be more clear with Belgium on this. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I want to get as many contributions in as possible. So again, a reminder, put your hands up, your virtual hands up. I've noted, and I'm going to come to some of you first, but there's Thomas Giesel. I hope I haven't pronounced your surname wrongly. Thomas, you're an MEP on the Budget Committee. Can you kind of comment from your perspective on what you're listening and hearing and the mood within the Parliament, if you're there? Thomas?
I am there.
Thank you.
Hello. Oops.
Hello.
Hello, everybody in this panel or in this round. You wanted to know what the mood in the parliament is?
Yeah.
Well, I guess a majority is seriously considering, giving out this reparation loan and having it secured with the frozen assets. I guess there's, of course, some concern that this will prolong and extend the war, basically to an unforeseeable time frame. Usually when you look historically, reparations were paid by a war party that surrendered.
Sure.
I consider it very unlikely that Russia is likely to surrender in the foreseeable future. So, Europe faces the choice that either, the reparation loan will be not repaid as long as this war continues, or it will be just, eventually Europe is going to stand the debt.
So, Thomas, if I may, you are Europe, because you are an MEP in this parliament. You're that proud institution that we have that holds the check and balance against the executive. What role, if any, can you and sympathetic MEPs play in putting kind of your weight behind this proposal and having a debate in Parliament or a motion? What is it you could do? What are the levers available to you to move this forward?
Well, the question is whether I would propose to move it forward. To be honest, I strongly believe that this war needs to be ended very, very soon. And I guess we need to find a negotiated solution. I'm not so upbeat about Ukraine's chances to win this war. I think
indeed
in the moment, the chances look rather bleak for Ukraine to win this war, and therefore I think we should very seriously consider what President Trump has proposed. I see it goes far away from a lot of resolutions that this parliament has agreed on. But we cannot ignore what's going on in the battlefield, at least from what we gather, what's going on in the battlefield.
Exactly.
And I think, to be honest, I think we should have ended this war much rather already back in 2022. In April 22, when there were negotiations underway in Istanbul, I think this was a good chance. From all we gather, actually from people close to President Zelensky, there was a chance actually, to end this war without any territorial concessions on the part of Ukraine, just with with an agreement that they should not join NATO. I guess Ukraine would have been much better off had they agreed, and nobody knows exactly what the role of Boris Johnson was at the time. I think it was certainly not helpful to the Ukrainian interest at the time.
Put all of that aside, because that's kind of potboiler stuff from the past, and we can't change that. But it's very important. It's very important, the points you're making. But my point direct to you is, will we see something either from you or other dedicated, committed parliamentarians who see the existential threat of the war on Europe and in Europe to actually make sure there is a position made very clear before the council meeting on the 18th and 19th of December? Can we count on you, or can we can we rely on some sort of political statement coming out?
What kind of political statement would you expect? Would you expect that? I don't know exactly what kind of statement. I think Europe should.
You could call on.
Can I come in here?
Europe.
Can I come in here?
Take responsibility.
1 second. Let him finish.
Can I come in here?
Asking me, I think Europe should take responsibility to find an end to this war by diplomatic means. I think it's a shame for Europe that Europe does not play a critical role, that Europe is not even involved seriously with these negotiations.
Can I come in here?
You will.
Europe
1 second, Tim.
Do something about that.
Can I? It's not Tim. It's Hugo.
Sorry, Hugo. Yes, Hugo.
Yes.
Now you
can I
can.
just to be very clear?
Yeah.
Thomas is expressing his view. His is not the majority view among the European Parliament. He is speaking for a particular party on the far left of German politics, which is quite close to Vladimir Putin. So I don't think that you should expect him to be giving the impetus behind this loan that we are looking for. It's important the audience knows where he's coming from.
I fully agree. I was surprised to be, but if you ask me, I give my open and honest opinion on that,
Which is exactly
very
what I was
different from your
This is what I
point of
was
view.
okay. I
But I
take
think
both your
that's fair to
points.
say. I mean, we want to have an open discussions among the financial
Indeed,
Europe.
indeed. So let me be clear about my position. It doesn't matter to me where you sit, and I agree. And you know, it's not a case of the party you belong to. We are an independent think tank. No one is, you know, we are free of not having to make a view on this. And as a representative, as paid by the taxpayer in Europe, I'm expecting parliamentarians, we expect parliamentarians to launch some sort of assault, a political assault on making sure that this very important decision is taken forward in a meaningful, quick way, regardless of where you belong, because actually the threat isn't right, left, extreme, or center. It's a reality of what we have fought for since the early part of the last century and what we regard as being human rights-based international law framework that we have fought for all these decades. I'm now going to go to a couple of folk who've been so patient. I want to go to Gerlinda. Gerlinda, I know you've been patient, and Lucas, you've had your hand up, and others I will bring you. But I want you all to be as brief as possible because we've only got less than 20 minutes left.
I will be very brief, and thanks for Friends of Europe to bring us together. Two questions, one to Lee, the other one to his colleague. First, I mean, have your proposal actually been transmitted, discussed in the European Commission, or perhaps also among member states? Because in many ways it seems to me a striking solution. So I'm wondering why they haven't picked it up. And then the second question, other than political blackmail, why do you think that Trump could actually put his hands on those frozen assets? On the basis of what?
And Gerlinda, very briefly, just say who you are.
Oh, I was with NATO for 25 years, but I'm now as an independent NATO and international security expert working with the Brussels Freedom Hub.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Lucas, you've been very patient walking around the streets of wherever you are, watching you. Say who you are and what your question or issue is.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for this very timely and crucial discussion, perhaps the most important discussion to have at the moment. I'm in Luxembourg, the rainy streets of Luxembourg. My name is Lukas Schauk. I'm a policy advisor at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, where we've worked for more than 10 years on the reform of investment treaties and investor-state arbitration. And I want to allude to one point that's perhaps slightly an elephant in the room in this discussion, which is that Bart de Wever, the Belgian Prime Minister, has pointed to the bilateral investment treaty between Belgium, Luxembourg on the one hand, and the former Soviet Union, now the Russian Federation, as a successor of the Soviet Union, on the other hand, from 1989, as one of the sources of its legal concerns over the use of the assets to back the loan to Ukraine. And in particular, I want to point to the fact that this treaty signed in 1989 is typical of a whole range of treaties from that generation. So that means it provides very broad protection for foreign investments, substantive protection, like protection against expropriation, fair and equitable treatment, etc. And it also allows foreign investors to bring a direct arbitration claim against the state that they have invested in. So one of the key concerns that Bart de Wever has mentioned publicly and also has expressed in private vis-a-vis von der Leyen is that they are fearing that such a claim could be brought also by the Russian central bank against Belgium. So one general question I have for the panelists and all others in the room is why, and I may add on earth, are there still bilateral investment treaties in force between EU member states and the Russian Federation, or EU member states and Belarus, after years of war, after we know since 2014 that the Russian state has a totally aggressive stance towards our values and our commitments? Why are these investment treaties still in force? And I can almost already tell you what the answer is. It is because the European member states are still concerned about the protection of their investments, private investments in the Russian Federation. But there you have one pressure point, one choke point that the European Parliament could call for, etc. is what do we do about these legacy bilateral investment treaties that continue to wreak havoc on the sanctions regime, but they have done so on the climate policy, they have done so on the environmental policy, and they have done so on public health policies during COVID. So I think it's a key
Lucas, yeah,
conversation to be had
it is.
at this
You
moment.
raised a very, sorry, I'm going to butt in because I have
Yes.
to, because I'm conscious of time and I want to bring the richness of the room back in. You're making a really valid point, and you're raising the kind of dilemma and contradiction in terms that on the one hand we've seized assets, we've frozen assets, etc., yet we maintain these out of date, relationships which someone needs to turn their eye to. But I can assure you, as Friends of Europe, we'll be turning our attention to this next year. So you can keep in touch and we can look at that in terms of why this is still continuing to be the case, because it's being raised as a risk by the Belgians and others. I want to go to Jan Balau, if I've got that right, and then I'll go to Victoria, who is in Ukraine, and then I'll come back to our and Andre Sapir, I'll bring you to, and then I'm going to bring back all our contributors for the final, thoughts and reflections and with a focus on what do we do. So Jan, over to you.
Yes, it's
Introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, it's Jan Baliau. I'm a senior fellow at Egmont Institute and a former journalist at Belgian Public Television. I talked to the former CEO of Euroclear and also to Irana Mudra about this question. I'm Belgian, so I feel the heat. There is a huge pressure on Belgium, and I understand. I agree with my Ukrainian colleague that Belgium should be more transparent about the proceeds of these profits. Although the Belgian government promises that all goes to Ukraine, but we haven't seen the exact table. I must say to you that according to my sources, the guarantees that Belgium wants to agree to some kind of a scheme must be 100% legally binding and secure, because there is a huge fear that when there is a small risk that it will come back to Belgium. And you can say maybe it's 5-7 years, but Belgium cannot pay this amount of money. Our budget is not big enough to pay this. There's also fear that there will be some kind of a confiscation of Belgian assets in Russia. There are still Belgian companies active in Russia. So there is a huge pressure. The question I also have is, I want to add something about the agreement with the former Soviet Union of '89. The problem there, it's conflicts are not resolved by the normal judicial process, but by arbitration, which makes it much more difficult to predict what will be the final outcome. Question I have is, it's now about 140 billion euros for 2 years, but if we use this, the money is gone. What will happen if the war goes on for more than 2 years? Because then there will be no more Russian assets that can be used. So this is, I agree that we should use the assets now, because if Ukraine loses the war, then there is no need to, then we cannot do anything anymore with these assets. But I'm not sure it's the final solution for Ukraine if the war goes on.
No, but you must, that's like, we could be run over by a bus tomorrow. The issue here is both political, right? And sending a very strong signal that Europe means business to Putin and saying, we are going to support innocent victims of war crimes, innocent victims of an illegal occupation and a takeover and invasion of a country, because we feel it and believe it's against our values and our human rights track record. So part of the rationale for this is to be able to up the ante. Now, whether it'll be enough over the years is neither here or there, but the ante has to be upped now, if you will. But let's come back to your point. We don't have much time, but thank you for your points. And it's good that you've raised your sense of concern and the fact that things need to be watertight, but obviously also you are in solidarity with the fact that this has to happen in some shape or form very quickly. Andre Sapir.
Thank you very much.
Hello. Introduce yourself, please.
Yes, I'm an economist. I'm an economics professor in Brussels. I'm a Belgian citizen as well.
Good to have another Belgian citizen. Great.
I don't have a statement to make. I have only one question. I have a question. Now, and I'm putting this question essentially to Hugo Dixon, to Lee Buchheit, and to others who have put forward the idea originally. have any of them spoken to the Belgian authorities? I mean, so far, and I've not been involved in this at all. But as an economics professor, as somebody who speaks to many people in Brussels, I have obviously spoken myself to people of the different sides, and I would put here the different sides as those who are putting forward the reparation loan idea and the Belgian authorities.
Okay.
So I've been wondering whether there's been at all some bilateral discussion between the two sides, or
But yeah, okay.
that's all. That's the only question that I have. Because
No, but Andre,
when I
before the
speak,
question, yeah.
let me just finish. When I hear, like today, positions that are put forward, and the other day I happened to speak to a high-level person in our government. I got the sense that there's no discussion between the two. They're speaking via the press. Are people sitting down and confronting or with their advisors, discussing?
Okay.
That's all I want to know. It's just
No, sure, but Andre, don't go. So if you're speaking to these people, what vibe are you getting?
No, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. I mean, doesn't matter. I mean, what you get from the press is the same thing that one gets in private. Exactly the same thing. So, in a sense, when I hear our prime minister make statements, when you speak in private, I hear the same. I hear exactly the same thing. So it's not like I'm hearing something particular. What I'm hearing, you are hearing, and everybody else is hearing. And
Okay.
it's really a genuine question.
No, I understand. Your plea is there should be some sort of shuttle diplomacy between the different sides to get it moving. I only asked you the question because you said you're speaking to people, so therefore, legitimately, I would ask you, what are these senior people saying to you, and are they minded to move in the direction that we need to move in? But I'm conscious that you're not really at liberty or prepared to say at this stage, but that's not an issue. I want to move to Victoria, if I may. You're in Ukraine, I believe. Do introduce yourself.
No, I'm actually in London. I represent, actually in Cambridge to be precisely. I'm a director
Okay.
of Ukrainian program at Center for Geopolitics. Just be very brief on what Belgian authorities are speaking to Ukrainian authorities. I was a witness in all that because and that's my proposal to Timothy, Hugo, and colleagues, because we designed a kind of a policy brief that will be presented in London in 2 weeks' time on a very similar issue. So what is needed now is what I hear from Andrade and Jan is a lack of strategic communication. And that's basically being explained in the Belgian society. This is what I hear. It's also needed strategic communication and explanation to other societies. But at the same time, the actions are very much needed for Ukrainians because we are talking about the lack of budget resources starting from March 2026. And that's very much the reality. And in this case, we do have 10 points of the recommendations, which we'll be very happy to add into the Friends of Europe idea.
Please do. You're more than welcome to do that.
Yeah, we are actually in a very short period of time. And now we see the rapprochement of US and Russia will continue after not only with Kovanushakov meeting, but many other meetings, as far as I understand, they will be happening on the shuttle diplomacy. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Victoria, for that. And I think it's important we collaborate. This is meant to be a coalition that we want to bring together. The issue is, I think we're going to have to make sure there's a hard political framework set in place to be able to get there before the end of December, if you like, by the council meeting. And policy briefs, I think, are excellent. So please, let's do collaborate. But I think we need to find a kind of a hardware of what we do politically to get us to where we need to be in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And the other point, I think, that none of us have focused on for obvious reasons, but there's a backdrop to this, is if we don't do this, it's the taxpayer in Europe that's going to have to foot the bill. Public debt is the highest on record. It's the highest on record across Europe and globally, but in Europe in particular. And we can see what we saw in the budget in the UK, what we're seeing in France, what we're seeing in the Netherlands, elsewhere. Public money matters, and there is a fatigue growing. And if we don't do the right thing using this, what we do know is taxpayers won't be very forgiving when they have to give up their welfare net, when actually politicians could have taken a different pathway. Timothy, I'm going to go to you. and then I'll bring in our other contributors. Timothy?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just a couple of points. I mean, the note that once we use the 140 billion, that's it. I mean, I think it's important to note that the total is probably over 300 billion.
Yeah.
I mean, the 140 essentially, I sense, is the 190 in Euroclear minus the 50 for the ERA, but it excludes the UK 25 billion, obviously significant in Japan, significant in the US, right? So actually, it's probably a couple of years financing. Ultimately, it's 100 billion an annual financing for Ukraine. And then a couple of other points. I mean, this idea, I mean, this strategic communication idea, I mean, the reality is we've been lobbying for over 3 years to do this.
Yeah,
Belgium
exactly.
and Euroclear, you know, have been lobbying behind the scenes aggressively. It's not as though, you know, suddenly the Belgians have been presented with this, right? I mean, they've been very, very active across member states, across the Commission, at the ECB, trying to stop this for over 3 years, right? So, you know, I don't think it's just about strategic communication, right? And then I think the point about retaliation, very well made about the investment treaties, etc., and the reason they're still in place. I mean, let's just think about it. There's been huge lobbying against this by European business interests with assets stranded in Russia.
Yeah.
But let's just think about that. I mean, essentially what it means is that European and international business, Western business, made bad investment calls against the best advice of their own governments, often. You know, Putin's modus operandi has been clear since 2014. That's the annexation of Crimea, right? And yet these guys continue to invest in Russia. The Biden administration made it absolutely clear in 2021 the invasion was going to happen. They stayed invested. They earn windfall profits and they want a taxpayer bailout now rather than going after immobilized Russian assets. That's the reality. We are putting our own national security interests subordinate to the greedy business interests that stayed invested too long in Russia and made bad investment decisions. That's a huge moral hazard play, ultimately.
Sure. Yeah.
I'll end there.
No, but Timothy, no, I don't want you to end there because all of that's all well said. What do you think we should do?
Look,
what's the one thing that
look, in the end, we don't have time, right? We can debate everything. The reparation loan is not my favored solution, right? I prefer a sovereign wealth fund that, you know, is guaranteed by G7 countries and CBR assets, issues bonds that are bought by CBR, whatever. The reality is what we have on the table is a reparation loan. We have no time, right? Money is running out. Ukraine will lose. So in the end, this is as good as it gets. We just need to get the Belgians over the line. Yes, as I said, I understand the Belgian concerns about, broadening the guarantees beyond, and it's completely fair. I get it. I mean, it should be shared indemnity across the European Union. I actually, as I said, in the end, that's a low probability event. The guarantee actually, you know, if you put a 10% probability on it, if it's 140 billion, you know, and you just risk weight things, again, it makes absolute sense to do the reparation loan, to take the risk of Russia going down the legal route. Otherwise, we have to spend the money now. As you said, you already said, look, is the European taxpayer willing to continue to fund Ukraine to $100 billion a year because the Americans have walked away? I mean, that there are very difficult choices. You know, and in the end, we have no choice but to use immobilized Russian assets. No choice. We just have to get it done. And we need to make sure the ECB is pushed to provide the liquidity support, right? Because it's done it in the past, right? Exactly. As I said. So, I mean, you know, this is, we've messed around for 3.5 years. We are where we are. Reparation loan is the best option on the table. Just get it done.
Thank you very much, David. I'm going to go to Hugo. What can we do? What should we do? What are the next steps? How do we make sure the proposal you have gets onto the VDL's table, gets heard? What do we do into creating some form of shuttle diplomacy, if you like, between the naysayers and those who want to promote this in a Belgium context, so we get, as Tim said, get Belgium Euroclear over the line?
Look, I want a solution. If the European Commission can get its solution over the line, it's not the best solution, but it's a good enough solution. Get it done. If they can't get it over the line, they need to have our solution there as an alternative plan. Because as I said, it doesn't fall into the same problems with Belgium as the European Commission's does, and it doesn't fall into the same problems with Trump. People have asked, is the European Commission aware of our proposal? Yes, of course it's aware of our proposal. And it's just that sometimes, but I can tell you what actually happened. Our proposal, this version of our proposal was published in early July. Von der Leyen's office knew all about it, but the technical people were actually looking at an older version of our proposal. So they then created their version of the reparations loan, which we think isn't as good a mousetrap as ours. However, let them get a version of the reparations loan over the line, whichever way, and it has to be done now. And I thank you, Andre. I will actually pick up with you because I have had some contacts with the Belgian authorities, but not at the level that I would like to. And obviously, so I would definitely take you up on that. I wish I had an entire diplomatic service at my disposal, but we've had to sort of piece it together bit by bit over the last 2 years. We've had some brilliant people involved.
Yeah.
And all I want to say is that this issue, this idea that somehow going to taxpayers to find the money would be an equally good solution, quite apart from the difficulty of persuading taxpayers to put their hands in their pockets. It's actually not true, because what's likely to happen is you'll get a continuation of the drip feed of cash that we've had over the last 3.5 years. That hasn't been good for Ukraine because they don't know if the money's going to run out. And the idea of this reparations loan is it's a game changer. It's a big deal. It boosts Ukrainian morale. It is a number that Donald Trump understands. It's also a number that Vladimir Putin understands. And therefore, we've got to get a huge sum of money to Ukraine, not just little drips and drabs.
Hugo, thank you very much. I can just say to you that, you don't have to have a full diplomatic corps at your service, but Friends of Europe has quite a number of very senior heavyweights on our trustees board who have either run the country or have been deputy prime ministers of the country, and we have a raft of folk that we can reach out on your behalf. And in fact, when Lee first wrote his paper and we convened our working group, we had a couple of Belgian ministers around that table and civil servants, so we can also make sure that they are revived, if you like, on behalf, because I think this is a case of all of us having shoulders to the wheel and all working collaboratively as much as possible. Lee and John, Lee, first come to you. Any final thoughts on the kind of technical points that are made here in terms of what you consider, are they, sufficiently risky? Or do you still maintain your position that this is an entirely workable situation and solution? But in terms of these outdated, financial relationships with Russia, what do you make of that?
Well, look, for 3.5 years, Euroclear has refused Russia's request to return the assets. It did that at EU direction, so it was obeying the law. If it is told to move the accounts to a new custodian, it will also salute and obey the law. It is no more risky from a legal standpoint than what it has already done for 3.5 years. The question on the EU's preference for its own proposal really, I think, is based on a benumbing dread that they have of the word confiscation. So they don't want to say that they've taken the money. Rather, they will take an amount equivalent to the money, but leave Euroclear in exactly the same legal position it is vis-a-vis Russia, and let the future play out. Let me make one final comment at the broadest level. Mr. Putin views this as a war of attrition, and he thinks he's winning. He believes he can outlast Ukraine in terms of soldiers and military equipment, and he believes he can outlast the United States and Europe in terms of financial support for Ukraine. He has already seduced Mr. Trump, and he is reckoning that for all the reasons that you've described about the fiscal fragility of European countries, that they will not indefinitely continue to pour billions of euros into Ukraine without some kind of political backlash. If you could lock in an amount of money that would cover Ukraine's budget deficits for the next 2 or 3 years, Mr. Putin's assumption that he will win a war of attrition, I think, is degraded. And if you want to promote a sensible settlement of this, Putin must be disabused of the belief that he can outlast Ukraine
Indeed.
and outlast its European partners.
Lee, thank you very, very much. As ever, sharp to the point. But you know that the fact that you point to that incredible contradiction in terms that Euroclear has done something which is not mandated to do in the first place, and now it's crowing about the legal authorities and the risk that's associated, because that needs to be brought out more. That needs to be brought out much more. I'm going to end where I started, which is America. And Ambassador John, share with us from what you've heard so far. This is political, obviously. You can feel the sense of frustration and the sense of contradiction, and the fact that we're being, we are bound by some moral dilemmas, but we're also actually not doing the right thing potentially in Europe, given where we've come from. So, final words to you, John.
I'm glad you gave me the chance to finish up, because I thought we began this conversation with clear strategic vision of the stakes. And then we got bogged down in numerous details, which suggest we don't understand those strategic considerations at all. This is truly a seminal moment in global history. We've enjoyed 75 plus years of no major power war because we established institutions that prevented another world war breaking out in Europe. And here we are on the verge of a major war in Europe. We have a major war, but it's only one large power and one medium-sized power, and we are risking global war because Putin's objectives go beyond Ukraine. If you understand that, the stakes on the reparation loans are very clear. This is an important issue, but all of the considerations that we've been talking about pale beside the consideration of a Russia strengthened by a conquered Ukraine looking to do more damage, at least amongst the former members of the Warsaw Pact.
Yeah.
So this is existential for Europe if it wants to continue to be free, and it's existential for that matter for the United States if it has a vision to see that the transatlantic relationship is critical to American security and American prosperity. Again, I can't say I'm enthusiastic about where American policy is. I spent most of the last several years more concerned about European policy.
Yes.
But right now, we have the ability, and I shouldn't say so much we, you have the ability, you Europeans have the ability to take
let's
that.
keep the alliance alive. It's a we. With the alliance is still there.
No. I'm talking now about the reparations issue. The loan, the frozen assets issue. You can make the decision. You can steal a march on the worst voices in Trump world and get that money to Ukraine. That may not win the war for Ukraine, but it just might. It just might. It would certainly make it hard for the bad voices in Trump world to dictate the policy going forward. And it would also throw a serious spanner into Putin's dreams of taking Ukraine. This is absolutely essential. The concerns of the green eye shade economists pale besides the geopolitical, which are also economic considerations. A Russian victory in Ukraine will require far more expending by European taxpayers than even $100 billion a year to buck up Ukraine's economy, to buck up Ukraine's balance of payments. So again, the stakes are enormous. We got to get this done. I've worked closely as an aide to Phil Zelikow when he was pushing his idea. I've worked a little bit with Hugo as he pushes his idea. We got to get one of these across the wire.
Exactly.
It's that simple. So thank you all for inviting me. And
John, thank you for reminding us. It's it's ironic, given what we hear so much from America, for someone to remind us of that strategic focus and not to lose sight that about where we've come from. And your clarity and focus is really very welcome. Thank you for that. I want to thank all of you for contributing. It's short and sweet. I've gone over time, so my apologies. What we do know is this debate isn't finished today. We need to act with speed and gumption and a sense of real, I suppose, purpose that we need to get this moving within the next 2 or 3 weeks. Our invitation to you is open. Join this coalition of the willing that wants to move in the right direction. We have a number of initiatives coming up that we would work with you on. But one thing, as I end off, is that one might argue that we're already in a covert war with the special measures that we're experiencing in most member states or in parts of in Europe, the outages, the bots that are attacking system, the fact that we are having the odd drone flying over Belgium Airways or East European countries, that is a modern form of hybrid covert warfare, and we're not talking about it. So in effect, actually, Europe should be more concerned that there's something happening right in front of us and beneath our feet that we ought to be addressing right away, rather than, as Lee said in his paper famously 2 years ago, clutching our pearls to our necks. So thank you all for that. We have a major Western Balkan summit happening on Thursday, on the 4th of December. If you wish to join that, this conversation will no doubt come up, because whether we like it or not, the Balkans is a security shield and has a very serious implication as a result of what we do with Ukraine. Let us not forget that. And then next week, on the 9th, we launch a major report on the space implications and space as a new security frontier. In between those two gateposts, we'll be pushing out a paper, which we're calling a warning shot. 2 ex-senior NATO officials who will pull out some of these issues that I've been referring to as what we are witnessing is a covert hybrid war right now on Europe's shores and its land. Thank you all. Thanks to all our contributors. If you have comments or other questions you want to raise, please email us. You know where to find us. We're on our website, Friends of Europe. And thank you. And we will continue this in earnest and with speed. Take care and thank you for joining us, and look after yourselves.